If God were truly in control, culture wouldn't need to evolve. It would have been perfect from the start. But instead of perfection, we've had war. Instead of clarity, we've had crusades. Instead of universal truth, we've had thousands of conflicting gods, each claiming to be the only one. So maybe the problem isn't that we've misunderstood God's plan. Maybe the problem is believing there ever was one. In this conversation, we're unpacking a powerful idea that the ever changing adaptive nature of human culture isn't a sign of divine wisdom, it's a sign of human effort. Cultural evolution, with all its struggle, contradiction, and growth, doesn't point to a perfect, all controlling deity. It points to us, because culture doesn't evolve through revelation, it evolves through freedom, the courage to question and challenge old norms, failure, the mistakes that show us what doesn't work, and feedback, the insight we gain from living with the consequences. And that's not how a divine plan unfolds. That's how human progress happens. If God were truly writing the script, the plot wouldn't require genocides, slave trades, or reform movements just to move the story forward. But it does, because this isn't God's story, it's ours. Cultural evolution, the ever changing adaptive nature of human culture, is strong evidence against the existence of a singular, all controlling God. Why? Because cultural change arises from freedom, failure, and feedback, not from the dictates of a perfect, unchanging authority. So let's get some definitions and some clarifications. Cultural evolution is the process by which human beliefs, behaviors, customs, values, and institutions adapt over time through collective learning, experimentation, and response to environment or experience. An all-controlling God is a deity who is omnipotent, which is all-powerful, omniscient, all-knowing, and sovereign over all events and outcomes, particularly one who is believed to have established eternal moral laws and unchanging truths. If God were all-controlling, culture would be static. A perfect sovereign deity would presumably create the best possible cultural model from the start. That model would not require constant iteration, like democracy replacing monarchy or abolition replacing slavery. Therefore, ongoing cultural change, especially moral progress, is incompatible with the idea of a divine blueprint that never needed revision. Also, culture evolves through human-centered mechanisms. Again, freedom. People challenge norms and introduce new ideas. So that's the civil rights movement, feminism, science, and even LGBTQ plus inclusion. There's also failure. Societies make mistakes, wars, oppression, economic collapse, and adapt based on what didn't work. And then there's the feedback. New generations question what was handed to them and adapt based on real world outcomes, not divine directives. These mechanisms suggest that moral and social progress emerges from trial and error, not divine decree. If a perfect, unchanging God truly governed human society, why would morality evolve? Why would slavery, patriarchy, or genocide ever be tolerated in the first place? Why would scripture encode outdated or harmful norms like stoning, polygamy, or submission? The fact that we now reject many biblical norms as immoral reveals that either God's will was wrong, humans misunderstood it, which undermines the idea of divine clarity, or the idea of a singular, perfect, culture-shaping God was a human projection from the start. Cultural evolution aligns with secular humanism. Instead of divine commands, secular ethics rely on empathy, evidence, and mutual well-being. This model accepts that no culture is final, only improvable. Cultural evolution then reflects humanity's own growth, not submission to an unchanging celestial dictator. The adaptability of human culture is not a reflection of divine perfection, but human participation in shaping meaning, morality, and society itself. In other words, if God was in control, culture wouldn't need to evolve, but because we are, it must. So let's go through a step-by-step breakdown. Cultural evolution requires trial and error. The claim here is that human cultures evolve not through divine instruction, but through experimentation, failure, adaptation, and iteration. This process of trial and error stands in sharp contrast to the idea of a perfect, omniscient God guiding culture from the top down. Culture is a learning system, not a delivered system. Human society doesn't operate like a downloaded divine program. It behaves like a living, breathing, learning system. People try things. Some of it works, some doesn't. Consequences are analyzed. New norms emerge. Those new norms are taught, refined, and either evolve or get replaced again. This is true across all domains: ethics, law, science, gender roles, economic models, and rituals and beliefs. There is a historical evidence of trial and error. Let's ground the idea with three clear examples. A. Animal sacrifice is practiced widely in early societies, including Israelite religion, meant to appease deities, cleanse sin, or win favor. This was eventually abandoned as societies developed more symbolic, philosophical, and humanitarian ethics. If animal sacrifices were divinely ordained and morally sufficient, why would later generations abandon it? B. Patriarchy. Enshrined in most ancient cultures and religious texts, including the Bible, it was once treated as divinely natural. Women were property, authority was male. Today, increasingly rejected in favor of egalitarian models based on human rights and mutual respect. Why would a just God promote an unjust hierarchy as a universal truth? C. Scientific paradigms. From flat earth to heliocentrism to Newtonian mechanics to relativity to quantum mechanics, science evolves because of constant doubt, discovery, and revision. No scientific field claims to be final or flawless. It thrives on impermanence. If divine knowledge were available, why would science need to stumble forward in the dark? Trial and error contradicts divine control. A perfect and all-knowing deity wouldn't need cultures to fail violently before evolving, such as slavery, genocide, and the Crusades, or learn moral truth through suffering and generational trauma, or reinvent justice century after century. If God had a flawless blueprint, why wasn't it implemented at the beginning? Why would millennia of brutal mistakes be required for human beings to discover truths we're told were written on our hearts? There is a case for human-centered growth. Trial and error makes perfect sense in a human-centered, naturalistic world. We aren't handed truth, we pursue it. We aren't bound by divine edicts. We build moral frameworks based on experience. We're allowed to fail because failure is how we grow. This is what makes cultural evolution so human. It's messy, it's painful, it's nonlinear, and ultimately, it's ours. A perfect God wouldn't need culture to suffer their way forward, but evolving cultures show us who's really doing the work. We are. If God were in control, culture would be static or uniform. Let's start by defining the kind of God many claim is in charge of human affairs. A God who is omnipotent, able to enforce a singular will over all people, places, and time, omniscient, fully aware of all consequences, needs, and best outcomes, benevolent, genuinely invested in human flourishing and well-being. If such a God exists and actively governs the human story, we would expect that God to design a coherent, consistent, and universal moral framework, a cultural system that reflects the best possible values, avoiding needless suffering, oppression, and confusion. A singular God should yield a singular culture. If a perfect being designed human culture, morality wouldn't need constant reinvention. Slavery, misogyny, and genocide wouldn't appear as early features of religious texts. Justice wouldn't be something we discover, it would be something we inherit. We would expect one clear, ethically superior system of governance, family structure, spirituality, human rights, and social norms. Instead, what we actually observe in human history is A, dramatic cultural diversity. Tribes in the Amazon have radically different beliefs from medieval Europeans. Ancient Greeks viewed same-sex love as normal, while Victorian England criminalized it. Eastern and Western religious traditions diverge on morality, ritual, gender, and the very nature of the divine. These differences aren't different expressions of the same truth. They are often contradictory and mutually exclusive. B, moral progress opposing religion. The abolition of slavery came in defiance of religious justifications, not because of them. Women's suffrage and civil rights movements had to overcome scriptural barriers, not uphold them. Pride inclusion has faced the strongest resistance from those claiming divine authority. If God were guiding the cultural process, why would the most compassionate advancements repeatedly emerge against the grain of religious tradition? It's human agency, not divine decree, that drives change. What drives cultural shifts is not revelation from on high. It's protest, philosophy, rebellion, scientific discovery, empathy, tragedy, reflection. Culture moves when humans respond to harm, injustice, and the failure of outdated systems. This is exactly what you would expect from an earthly trial and error process. not a divinely optimized plan. There is a central contradiction. Here's the conflict in a single sentence. God is in control, then either God's plan keeps changing or God is allowing people to live in contradiction to it on a massive scale. Both options undermine the idea of a sovereign, benevolent, all-knowing deity. Either God can't stop moral chaos, which means he's not omnipotent, or God didn't foresee the fallout, which means he's not omniscient, or God doesn't care enough to intervene, which means he's not benevolent. None of those options support the mainstream theological claim. The evidence of cultural diversity, conflict, and moral evolution doesn't point to divine control. It points to human responsibility. If we were in a theocratic simulation governed by a perfect being, we wouldn't be fighting wars over which version of God is right. We'd all be living in the same code. Cultural syncretism defies doctrinal absolutism. What is cultural syncretism? Cultural syncretism is the process by which different traditions, beliefs, rituals, and symbols are blended together over time, especially when cultures interact through trade, conquest, colonization, or migration. It's not rare, it's not marginal, it's the norm in human history. Syncretism directly undermines theological absolutism. If a religion claims to possess exclusive divine truth, a pure, unchanging revelation from a perfect God, then that truth should not borrow from or blend with surrounding myths, rituals, or customs. It should stand apart as unique, clear, and divinely protected. But what we see instead is this. Religions borrow, religions blend, religions evolve. Christianity borrowed pagan elements. Christmas and Easter both absorbed elements from pre-Christian pagan holidays like Saturnalia, Sol Invictus, and fertility festivals. Halo imagery, holy days, and even church architecture draw from Roman imperial and Greek philosophical traditions. Even Roman Catholic Church attire and customs still mimic ancient Egyptian costumes and tradition in their liturgy. Saints replace the local gods, feast days replace seasonal celebrations. A divine exclusive religion shouldn't need to piggyback off the very false traditions it claims to replace. You also have Islam and Judaism, which share tribal roots. Both grew out of Semitic tribal culture, sharing stories, laws, dietary rules, and prophetic traditions. Quranic texts reference biblical characters but reshape their roles. Theologies diverge, but the cultural DNA is intertwined. If God gave separate final revelations to two different groups, why are they so dependent on shared human frameworks? There's also the colonial suppression and hybridization of indigenous beliefs. Colonizers tried to erase indigenous spiritualities through forced conversion. Indigenous peoples fuse traditional practices with imposed religions. You have the Afro-Caribbean religions, the Native American Christianity. This was not divine revelation, it was cultural survival under oppression. Hybrid faiths are not signs of divine will. They are proof that humans adapt belief systems when under pressure. Syncretism equals human adaptation, not divine instruction. The messy interweaving of belief systems reveals something profound. Humans are meaning makers, not just message receivers. We remix stories, update rituals, localize ethics, and reinterpret symbols. Faith systems are not fixed. They're cultural software evolving with the hardware of human experience. If God were crafting a perfect, exclusive message, it wouldn't morph with the seasons, change with the empires, and depend on what other people are already doing. Doctrinal absolutism becomes impossible to defend. Every time a religion absorbs a local custom, mirrors an older myth, or alters its theology to stay relevant, it reveals its human fingerprints. You can't claim God never changes while your sacred calendar, rituals, doctrines, and ethics are a patchwork of human history. Religions were never delivered from the heavens. They were stitched together right here on earth. Cultural syncretism isn't a glitch in the system. It's the proof that no one religion has a monopoly on truth and that every belief system is, at its core, a remix of human imagination and adaptation. Let's talk about the fact that growth through conflict contradicts sovereign perfection. The core claim here is that if everything in the world were orchestrated by an all-powerful, all-knowing, loving God, then culture should evolve through wisdom, not warfare. Progress should be born from insight, not atrocities. Humanity should learn through clarity, not chaos. But the reality is that our most transformative cultural shifts are triggered by suffering, conflict, and collapse. History evolves through catastrophe, not revelation. Let's look at how actual cultural progress tends to emerge. A. Genocide and colonization. The modern world map, global languages, religious affiliations, and power structures were largely shaped through violent conquest and colonial domination. Indigenous traditions were often erased or syncretized under threat of death? Would a perfect God require mass suffering to orchestrate cultural expansion? B. Wars and revolutions. Concepts like democracy, civil rights, and abolition emerge not from divine epiphanies, but from bloody revolts, civil wars, and mass uprisings. Societies didn't wake up to moral clarity. They were forced to confront injustice through pain. If God values justice, why not deliver these truths without the trauma? C. Existential moral struggles. Whether it's women's rights, pride, inclusion, or mental health awareness, progress comes after generations of stigma, abuse, and marginalization. People fight, suffer, resist, and slowly drag culture forward. That's not divine design. That's human resilience. The theological problem is that it seems to be cruelty by design. If we claim that God is loving, concerned with our well-being, omnipotent, capable of preventing suffering, omniscient, aware of every consequence, then the necessity of trauma for transformation becomes not just a contradiction, but an indictment. Why would a loving God build a world where humans only become better by being brutalized? A system that requires pain in order to improve isn't just flawed. It's either designed by a sadist, run by the negligent, or functioning without divine control at all. Let's consider a more plausible explanation: evolution without a divine engineer. Cultural progress through pain makes far more sense in a godless framework. Evolution, biological and cultural, is messy. Growth happens by necessity, not divine foresight. Mistakes are made, lessons are learned, and people adapt because they have to, not because God intended it. This model doesn't require a perfect being. It requires only human beings responding to imperfection. If pain is the price of progress, then God either set the price too high or doesn't exist at the register. In a world supposedly run by a loving, perfect deity, cultural transformation wouldn't require bloodshed, but it does. And that tells us something important. The world isn't being governed by a God. It's being built by people who survived without one. Cultural evolution isn't just a side effect of history. It's evidence of who's really doing the work. If the universe were governed by a perfect, all-controlling God, culture would be complete, not corrective. Morality wouldn't require revolutions to move forward. Progress wouldn't emerge from genocide, slavery, or civil war. But that's not our story. Our story is one of mistakes that became lessons, oppression that sparks resistance, ideas that outgrow their origins, people who rise again and again to build a better version of what came before it. Culture evolves not because God planned it that way, but because we are the ones writing it. There is no divine template, just human trial, error, and transformation. So let's stop pretending cultural evolution proves God's hidden hand. It proves something far more powerful, that we are capable of shaping meaning, morality, and society without a cosmic puppeteer. And that, perhaps, is the most sacred truth of all. Thank you for hanging out with me today. And if you've enjoyed this conversation, check out some of the other videos on the screen. And until next time, keep rising.